This is Viz, and with us today, out in San Diego way, is Dr. Ellen Lacter, a licensed clinical psychologist who's also involved with the University of California at San Diego. And tell us, Doc, what do you do out there?
I do continuing education classes in play therapy and ritual abuse.
And that's what has brought us together, is the work that you've done in the area of ritual abuse. Something that we've done from time to time, but we want to get a greater body of speakers to the issue. I think sometimes people out there, your average person in the street, is a bit reluctant to believe that this takes place, and it's a little harder sell for people to come across and realize this is a very hideous thing that's taking place, and it's an ugly little secret in America, and also around the globe, is it not?
Yes, it happens everywhere. It's been happening everywhere for thousands of years in one way or another.
What do you want to focus on? We use the umbrella term ritual abuse, but specifically regarding your work, how do you want to start this?
Well, I'd really like people to understand that this is real. There's been a very organized propaganda campaign to discredit survivors and discredit psychologists who are exposing this, and to even discredit law enforcement and district attorneys who have tried to do something about this. And so I'd like to help the truth get out there that this is a huge problem, that many people are affected. I believe in San Diego that there's probably well over 1,000 children being abused horribly in cult practices here, and I don't think San Diego's any worse than any place else.
This may be happening on several levels, I'm assuming. But it is systemic, isn't it, at one point? Systemic
meaning...
it's been ongoing. In my terms, I'd say it's been ongoing. It's very entrenched. There's a network involved, and I'll leave it there.
I think there's multiple networks involved. I think that one of the mistakes on the Internet that is kind of put out there is that it's one organized network and that they're all working together and that there's just one very powerful group trying to dominate the world. I don't believe that. I believe that there are a number of different organized groups that all have the agenda of ruling the world. So there's the satanic network, and I don't believe that that is all networked, just like the witchcraft network. And when I say witchcraft, I don't mean Wicca. I'm talking about ritually abusive, sacrificial witchcraft cults. They, too, are somewhat organized into a hierarchy, just like the Satanism, but then there are also smaller groups kind of working on their own, all also very well hidden. And then there's people that have more political agendas, maybe without any spiritual component, and some may have a spiritual component, but these are also groups that want to dominate the world and that abuse people and experiment and mind control in order to have their people never be able to tell or even never be able to remember what was done to them, and to be able to use those people toward their ends. So there's multiple groups, all using abusive practices and mind control to control their victims.
Maybe later on we can go back to some of the globalist levels on which this may take place.
Okay.
I want to ask you just one other sidebar question about groups, and I want to go back to what these individuals do suffer. Have you ever encountered, and I guess you could put this under the umbrella of Satanism, but have you encountered at all victims who have been abused by, say, supposedly secret occult societies like the OTO or AA or high-degree Freemasonry, anything like that at all?
People do often belong to things like OTO or Freemasonry. In a case of something like OTO, what do you mean by AA? What does that stand for?
That's another one that's even beyond OTO. I believe that's called Astro Argenium.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Right.
Sometimes some of these groups have publicly acknowledged groups, like OTO is publicly a publicly out there group with a website.
Right.
So a typical victim may belong to something, or may have family members who belong to OTO, but the actual most binding abuse that was done to them would be a level deeper, would never be anything that would have a public, it may have a public cover, but that would not be truly representative of the most organized network involved in that group. So in other words, I think that the people who have family members who belong to OTO actually belong to something either smaller or bigger that's more binding, and also belong to this front organization.
All right, I just called up on the internet some of the names of AA, and it comes down to usually Argenium Astrum or Astrum Argenium, and you can take a look. Not that you need to know that there's another one out there, by all means.
Uh-huh.
We also had an author come on by the name of Craig Heimbichner, who wrote a book called Blood on the Altar.
Uh-huh.
It just was specifically about the OTO.
Uh-huh.
And just one other thing too, we've had on Peter Levenda, who's written a book called Unholy Alliance, about a Nazi compound down in Chile that was engaged in child ritual abuse and sacrifices and such, and it was not busted until just a little while ago because I guess Allende and Pinochet let it alone and basically protected it. I'm saying this because I want people to understand that what we're talking about is really global in capacity, and can be also happening next door to you.
Absolutely.
Now, but let's talk about the victims. Are they mostly children? Are they mostly females? I mean, is that some kind of a profile, or is it everything goes?
Are they most? If they are more female than male, it wouldn't be by too much.
Okay.
The females tend to end up in therapy and having severe anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and dissociative identity disorder. But the males will more often end up in prison and maybe a little less likely to end up in therapy, even though I think more and more of them are ending up in therapy now, it seems, the men.
This is going to be a bit unpleasant, but this is the reason we're doing this, to make people understand. I mean, this isn't gratuitous. It's necessary to make people believe. And the other thing I'll say, Doc, is I don't know your spiritual background, but I always go back to Jeremiah in the Old Testament when the Israelites were sacrificing their children to a stone owl named Moloch. And Yahweh came by and he said, it never entered my mind that you would do such a thing. My point is, I take that as truth, and I believe we have that still today, that evil does not get any more sophisticated. It's more debauched as it's always been. And it's hideous. And so, I mean, given that, can you tell us, though, what kind of damage have these people suffered? What has happened to them?
Well, usually beginning when they're very, very little, in infancy, they are tortured with the deliberate goal of creating dissociated identities. So the abusers are trying to do trauma that is so extreme that the person will create other personalities to hold the memory of that trauma so that the main personality, as it gets older, will be able to live and function without knowing what happened and looking somewhat normal, even though I don't think they look totally normal in most cases. So the torture is extreme, because it's only with that level of extreme torture that that kind of split is forced to happen in an individual. This isn't the kind of thing where the person, I think, chooses to create another identity. That can happen with abuse that starts later. This is the kind of thing where it's just forced because it's so overwhelming. So other identities are created, and then the abusers seek to control those identities and to hide all of their directives and memories in those hidden personalities, both hidden from the individual and, of course, hidden from other people. And this is usually done by the family members. So most times these children start out by being born into a family that has practiced this for generations. They've all been tortured since infancy. They torture their own young since infancy, and then later they may accept money from other groups to allow those other groups to program more hidden personalities toward their own agendas.
So this sounds a little bit like the MK Ultra project and some of the other projects where MPDs were used to, but they were used for a lot of reasons, weren't they? To commit certain crimes, or to be couriers, or to be sex slaves. Is that right?
What I am clear about is that those projects did a lot of experimenting, and I believe it's still going on. I believe that this whole use of mind control to try to make people do someone's bidding has been going on by a number of countries, including ours, the U.S., since the 40s or so. Now, I think that the research piece has always been a lot bigger than the usage piece. So I do believe there was also use. In other words, sometimes these people were used to do things, carry messages or have sex and carry a message. But I believe that the even now the experimentation piece is larger than the usage piece. I think they're just trying to fully develop as strong a capacity to control another person as they can, and are interested in seeing the extent to which they can do that. I'm not even sure how valuable the whole thing ultimately is for them. But I think I think our country and other countries are definitely in something of an arms race to master these techniques in case they need to use them. But how much they're actually sending these people on missions versus using these people to hone their art, I don't know.
So it would be your feeling that the greater amount of these cases are experimental, to see exactly what's more effective, etc.
Yeah, to develop the capacity to install mind control in a person's mind. I mean, so when we say experimental, I mean they're still torturing them and bringing them near death and creating personalities and asking them to do particular things. But the things that they ask them to do, I'm not sure how much they're actually doing them or how much they're doing them in a laboratory setting. I don't have corroboration to prove that they're actually going out. I have accounts from people that they've actually done things, and some of those sound really credible to me. But I do have corroboration for the fact that the torture is being used to install mind control.
We had on quite a few months ago Kathleen Sullivan, who wrote the book Unshackled, The Survivor's Story of Mind Control. And that was pretty riveting in that, and Harry, who's my partner and is not here today, when we were listening to her tell us that her father was a Nazi. They came over to Pennsylvania and actually melded in and disguised themselves as Pennsylvania Dutch rather cleverly in that area, and that she was raised up by her father to be a victim. And she did commit crimes. She was really bound by what she could say at the time, because she could obviously incriminate herself. And it was just really startling for us and very shocking to hear her. I mean, she's now on. You sound like you're familiar with her work, are you?
To some degree.
Okay. Now, it was just to hear her speak. I mean, she sounds like she's had a lovely life. A credit to, as she would say, her belief in Jesus Christ and the therapy she's gone through. But when you hear her in that voice of hope talk about such dark things, it's really very shocking for anyone to hear.
Yes, and that's how therapists are too. You listen to somebody discuss these things, and you can hear the pain in their voice, and the symptoms fit the pain, and the descriptions, and the whole thing is very, very convincing, but, I'm always very cautious for both legal reasons and for some other reasons to take the next step to saying, I know it's true. It can feel true, and we can be pretty sure it's true, but I reserve that level of knowing for things that I have proof for. So I'm not saying it's not true at all. It's just that I have to be very, very careful because there's tremendous pressure on us as clinicians to not believe any particular memory, and a lot of that was generated by the whole false memory movement.
Is it possible, or are you willing, to give us, shall we say, a case history anonymously where someone came in and you were aware of what had happened to him or her, and that someone was actually put on the road toward healing because of the work that you do? Is there something like that you can tell us about as far as the progression that way? I can't describe a specific case because that would be, breaching confidentiality, even if I leave the name out, because just the details would be I'd have to have a person's permission. But I can definitely say that, when just in general, when people come in, usually they have a lot of post-traumatic symptoms, horrible flashbacks, a lot of anxiety, a lot of physical pain that they may not totally understand, and then they would usually first begin to get memories of sexual abuse within their family, not including the ritual abuse part, but the more what we call garden variety sexual abuse, the kind that a lot of people experience without the spiritual overlay of worship of Satan or witchcraft deities, etc. And then over time, if the clinician is willing to let the client know that they know about other kinds of abuse, we have to kind of walk a fine line between giving them enough information to let them know that we know enough that we will believe them and that we can help them, and saying something that could ever be construed as leading or could cause the client to question their memories as they first come up because of something we said. So we have to be subtle, but yet help them feel safe to open up about that. And then they'll tend to begin to get the memories of a whole other level of abuse, which involves rituals and worship of deities and that kind of thing. And then there's usually, that becomes a very difficult road. Keith, can you hold on one second? Sure.
Can we put this on hold for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm really sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so then after the client gets the memories of the more typical sexual abuse in the family, then they'll start to get sometimes some memories of some ritual trauma. So they may remember more than one perpetrator being there and some kind of abuse that goes beyond regular sexual abuse. So maybe something of their body, a scraping of the skin or an ingestion of blood or chanting or a murder or a sacrifice of perhaps a small animal or something like that. And then they have a struggle for some time because the programming to never remember and never tell causes them to re-experience extreme pain physically and extreme states of anxiety and terror as they are beginning to tell this. So the road becomes more difficult at this point. They typically say, I made this all up. I've heard that 1,000 times. I must have made this all up. I made it all up. It's not true. Mm-hmm. That's usually directly related to programming. Sometimes that just comes from dissociation, that when a person has dissociated something horrible for so long, when they first get the memory, they're not sure whether to believe it or not. They needed to not believe it for a long time, and now that it comes back up, it can feel unreal. But a lot of times, I must have made it all up, or I must have dreamt it, are the words that were told to them while they were being programmed mm-hmm. to make them question themselves. I would say that more than half of the abuse that happens to these people is to cause them to never remember and never tell, and the other half is toward the goal of that group. So if it's Satanism, it's toward empowering Satanism. If it's witchcraft, it's toward empowering the witchcraft deities. If it's an espionage group, it's toward their espionage goals. But more than half is to cause them to never remember and never tell. So their symptoms can increase. They can become suicidal. Sometimes they're even programmed to kind of make the therapist have to work really hard to try to burn out the therapist, etc. There's a lot of programming to sabotage therapy. Sometimes they'll start falling asleep in sessions. That's also programmed in. All kinds of things are done. So it's at that point that the therapist really has to know how to work with the programming, which is something that even a lot of therapists who work with ritual abuse, or let's say maybe not the ones who are specialists in it, but the ones who say, yes, I believe it, and I've had clients who I'm sure this has happened to, they might not really know how to work with the programming, and that takes a lot of extra training. And if you can work with it, it's still a long haul because very often there's many levels of trauma, and the most binding trauma is the deepest and the last stuff that you often get to. So the person may first remember, let's say, some rituals, and then maybe they might even remember some espionage type of abuse. That will tend to come before the most deep ritual abuse. Witchcraft memories tend to be remembered later, so a person may even work through, let's say, dad was practicing Satanism and mom was practicing witchcraft, and the child was sold for one of the military espionage projects. They may get dad's Satanism and the military espionage stuff first, and then it may take a couple of years before they get to the witchcraft stuff, which is actually the stuff that's held most deeply in the unconscious. So it's a long haul with internal sabotage from programming to fight with the whole time. And most of these people, survivors, develop tremendous wisdom that this is going to be a long haul and that they're going to have to do a lot of work within themselves all the time. And having some kind of a spiritual source of strength is, I wouldn't say necessary, but almost necessary. It's extremely helpful. And support from other survivors, and it takes a whole network of help to go through this, and it is a life thing. It doesn't. You don't get to go in and have it done in a year. But some people can, within a couple of years, get to a pretty healthy level of strength and functioning and do okay. And some people actually manage to function pretty well throughout the whole process. They may be in a lot of pain, but they can function.
Is there? Well, first of all, let's tell everybody again who we're speaking with. This is the Grassy Knoll on Dade City Micro Radio, AM 1610 WDCX. This is Viz, and with us is Dr. Ellen Lacter from out in San Diego, who deals with victims of ritual abuse. You have a website out there. It's a heck of a long URL.
I know.
But what we'll do is this. We'll say, do a search on Ellen Lacter. That's Lacter, Dr. Ellen Lacter, plus Truth Be Known, and that'll get you out to the URL, because it is truthbeknown2000.tripod.com /truthbeknown2000/ID20. Well, then it goes on and on and on. But anyway, and also even if you just go to the .com part of it, it will get you to your basic practice, and you can link to that other website from there, can't you?
Yes, and they can email me. Anybody can email me. It's Ellen Lacter, ELLENLACTER @earthlink.net, and then I'll get them to the place they need to go.
All right. Now, one of the offenders seems to be these religious, quasi-religious, occult groups. You had informed me about a situation that was taking place down in Louisiana.
Yes.
Were you drawn to that by any means? What was going on? What was the name of the church down there?
Let me see.
Hosanna?
Hosanna Church,
Yeah.
yeah, and it was in something with a P. The name of the town was with a P.
It's a name that's Indian, but it's around in and around New Orleans and Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and did that peak?
It's Ponchatoula. Yeah.
Did that draw your attention for any particular reason?
Well, I'm an activist against ritual abuse and mind control, and so I'm part of a network of people who all give us information as soon as it breaks, and we're all really happy whenever there's some kind of, whenever these people are caught, whenever something finally hits the newspaper, and when the media has the guts to acknowledge some of the ritualistic aspects of the abuse. What tends to happen is that the media and the DA's office only acknowledges the sexual or physical abuse of children and leaves out the ritualistic elements, and that doesn't help get the truth out. But in this case, they acknowledge the sacrifice of animals and the fact that this is a pretty large network of perpetrators, and so I'm glad that got out there. Now I also doubt that this particular group is a very sophisticated ritual abuse group, because they did get caught and they did get arrested. Most of the perpetrators of the most organized abuse never get arrested, and they raise their kids to have jobs in law enforcement. They raise their kids to have jobs at Child Protective Services, in the district attorney's offices, etc. So they have their own network established in the institutions to erase records, to disbelieve these reports. They have a very organized, never let it come out campaign.
With law enforcement and also with, let's take it one at a time. I'm thinking also about the press.
Uh-huh.
The press is not wont to shed much light on this sector of American life, is it?
Well, that's the other thing I should have added, is that they infiltrate the press. So the most organized groups have raised some of their children to be reporters who definitely write articles saying none of this is true, these therapists are crazy, these survivors are victims of their therapists putting memories in their minds, and so the media is very influential, and it is one of their main ways of keeping the truth from being exposed.
I was also wondering, too, if some of the media moguls aren't involved in some of these situations and don't want any light, obviously, shed on their activities.
That could be. There again, I have to be very, very careful when I don't have corroboration for anything in specific, but I would definitely say that the groups would love that, to have some media leaders in place who would make sure that this stuff never got out there.
Wasn't there I think on your website, which is compartmentalized so that you can, for those who want to go to the website, you can find out certain aspects, what's going on there. Mm-hmm. And one of the links was, I guess, some correspondence exchange between, I forget who the parties were. I think one individual's name was Sauer. Do you remember that at all?
Yes.
What was that all about? Can you tell us?
Well, Mark Sauer and Jim Okerbloom, and then there's the third reporter, but more those two than the third, for the last, 12 or so years, have published many, many articles saying that these are false memories. And I remember one years ago where there was a legislator in California who wanted to pass a ritual abuse law against ritual abuse, and there was some article making him look crazy, or just that there was no basis for that kind of a law. And then about, I guess, is it going on 2 or 3 years ago, I was providing a workshop, a little 3-hour workshop at a conference, a family violence conference here in San Diego, an international conference, a very large conference. It was a 3-hour workshop on treating survivors of ritual abuse, psychotherapy with survivors of ritual abuse. And Mark Sauer wrote a big article trying to make me look crazy, and even had the district attorney at the time, Finks, his name is Pfingst, was quoted in that article to say that he's going to have his investigators there at Dr. Lacter's workshop to see what I'm doing, and there was this huge effort to, in my opinion, an effort to shut me up, but that's really what was at the basis of that. The grand jury of San Diego was sent to my workshop. This is unheard of. We have such a thing called academic freedom here, where we're supposed to be able to share opinions in an academic setting. In fact, and I have the grand jury sitting in my workshop.
It's for peace of mind, Doc.
Unbelievable. And then there was also a attempt from some of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation people to get all of the sponsors, all of the co-sponsors for the conference to withdraw their support because of this workshop being offered. This is just a little 3-hour workshop on how to help these people. And so what was very interesting was that a lot of people wrote letters to the editor of the San Diego Union Tribune saying, what is this? Why is this Mark Sauer, reacting like this to a little 3-hour workshop? And, it sounds like he's trying to shut Dr. Lacter up, and why can't she talk about treating these survivors, and what the heck is going on here? And none of those articles got published. In fact, what happened was, none of those letters to the editor, got published. And in fact, the editorial staff gave those letters from those people, the people who wrote those letters, gave their letters to Mark Sauer, which is a breach of ethics.
Yep.
There's supposed to be a wall between the office that takes the letters to the editor and the person who wrote the article that they're complaining about, so that there can be some way of having this opinion be heard.
A dialogue,
and it said it was given to Mark Sauer, and then he wrote everybody letters back saying, this ritual abuse thing isn't real, and blah, blah, blah. So, that was very, very wrong.
But it does show, again, where there is, in the mainstream press, a reluctance or a really stark resistance about getting this kind of information out. And you have to sit back and just ask yourself, why? Why? What's the problem here?
Right.
And what are you hiding, and why are you hiding it, and are you part of it? And apparently the answer would be, yes.
Well, I can't go, and I could get myself with a nice healthy lawsuit if I say Mark Sauer is, yes, a part of it, but the question is definitely on the table.
No, and of course I've said that, so yes, I understand. But you do wonder why the resistance to pursue these matters. Well,
let me tell you just an interesting little story about this. What happened was there was a professor at one of the universities here, and I won't say her name so I don't get her in trouble, who had actually written a chapter in a sociology book on this hysteria, this ritual abuse hysteria. So she had been affected by all of the media reports saying that this is hysteria, that the therapists are crazy, that these memories are all false, that none of this stuff happened. She had believed that and actually contributed a chapter to a textbook about the social hysteria and believing this ritual abuse. She saw that article by Mark Sauer, and she called me, and she said, my God, why is he doing this to you? Now I wonder if I was wrong, if this was not hysteria, with such a effort to shut you up. There must be something of truth here, and she had me come and speak to her class. Well, so I thought that was really interesting.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but again, you said there was some kind of thing as what, academic freedom?
Yes, we're supposed to have academic freedom, and because of that, the workshop did go on. Luckily, the psychologist in charge of the Family Violence and Sexual Assault Institute, which was the main sponsor for that international conference on family violence, he wrote letters to the sponsors and said, this workshop will go on, and got good support for that. So luckily, we've kind of moved past the days when people were so intimidated by lawsuits that we, all just kind of were too careful. Now we can take a stand. Plus, we have all kinds of good research showing that many recovered memories are true, and and also there's some good documentation of some of the unethical practices of the false memory movement. So we were in a much better position to hold our ground, and we did, and the workshop went on, and the grand jury, I think, also saw that, we're not going to do anything here. And I think the actual people who were sent in from the grand jury, I think some of them were also sitting there going, why are we here? They seemed like nice people that were very, very confused and actually pretty interested in what was being taught.
About the false memory movement, as far as you know, to the best that you can speak to it, do you believe that it was created as an offensive against ritual abuse, or do you think it was legitimate and maybe was hijacked at some time or hijacked at certain points, not all the time? What was the deal with that?
Yeah, I am not sure who. I know Ralph Underwager was one of the founders. I'm not sure if he was the very first person to create it, and he was the man who showed his cards in some interview. I think it might have been in Sweden or Denmark, where it was some kind of pedophilia magazine, and he was interviewed and said something about there being nothing wrong with love between a man and a boy, or something to that effect. And if you read that interview, it looks that like his real motive was to protect pedophilia, but whether he was operating as kind of from that personal issue or whether he was part of something more organized, I'm not sure. Now, I do believe that many of the people who ended up having prominent positions in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation had ties to both ritual abuse and to the United States mind control project.
The reason I bring that up also is because in the case of the Franklin cover-up, are you familiar with that book at all?
Very.
All right.
Very familiar.
Okay, so here you go. You have, if I've got it right, you have a state senator and bringing this to light. And who does it involve but high-ranking people in a certain political party in that state? You have the police chief and you have the publisher of the Omaha newspaper involved in it. And, interestingly enough, there were no convictions. And interestingly enough, DeCamp, the author, John DeCamp, was never sued for anything, was never brought to civil court.
Yes. I think that the one conviction was of
Larry
the man,
King.
Yeah, for tax problems, tax issues.
Right. Larry King went. That's
true.
And
then there was a lawsuit by one of the victims. I'm trying to remember if it was against Larry King. I think it was.
Okay.
And that victim did win that lawsuit for damages for the abuse that he suffered. And the judge that heard that lawsuit said that when she had first heard this case, she thought that the allegations were not true, that when the Franklin case first came out, but that years later, when she was the judge for this lawsuit, she realized that she was wrong and that these things had happened, and she ruled in favor of the person who filed the suit.
When did you become aware of that event?
Fibonacci, it's a few years ago. I'm not sure of the date right now, but Bonacci won that lawsuit.
All right, it was Paul Bonacci who did win that lawsuit.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, he was a principal in it, along with a woman, Alicia, and I can't remember her last name, and I won't try, but there's also
Alicia Owen. It was a poor girl who testified as a minor. I think she was 15 years old when she testified to the grand jury about the abuse that happened to her, and she was jailed for perjury. Oh, my God, you know, if every child that tries to say, I was abused, could be jailed for perjury, then we just can throw our whole child protection system down the toilet. That is one of the scariest things I have ever heard, that girl sat in jail for years, and she did not recant. She was not going to say that what she said was not true. She held her ground, and that's very sad. I feel very sorry for her.
We'll never know. I mean, we overlook her courage to say, I'm not going to give states just because you want me to. I'm going to stick to my guns, and we all love those stories when we see them in the movies. But when you see a person like this have to go through it with really no light shit on it, she does it for herself. And we really don't understand, I think, the guts that it takes to do something like what she had done.
Oh,
and hopefully, somewhere down the line, that woman may have, hopefully, a decent life, for sure. As well as Bonacci also. And, of course, that whole situation's got another life, and I won't go into that now.
Right.
But I think you're aware that it also ties into Hunter S. Thompson's suicide, Rusty Nelson's being picked up, who was a photographer during those things.
That's right.
Yeah. But the thing
there were all these very suspicious deaths connected to that case. Really scary stuff.
Yeah, Cartier's plane crash, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, plane crashes are always accidents, aren't they?
You're right.
The other thing also is that I think what that has done is Alex Jones has done an expose on Bohemian Grove. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, and I've seen the video.
Okay.
And, it looks real to me, as far as I don't think he could have
fudged it, no.
Engineered. I mean, with it, he didn't have Steven Spielberg and his who's his technological guy, the guy who makes all the creatures and the visual effects.
I'm not paying attention. It's okay.
But if he didn't have them working for him, I don't think he could have pulled that off, because he's got thousands of people watching this this thing being burned and strange chanting and it's all. But even there, I would say that's not as deep as the stuff that I'm talking about when I use the word ritual abuse, because any ritual abuse group, well, first of all, they weren't really killing a person. They said it was an effigy. Then again, who knows whether it was or not. Right. They bring out this life-size thing wrapped in cloth and burn it in front of these thousands of chanting people, and who knows if that was really a person or an effigy. But I mean, it was pretty scary and pretty awful, but I definitely believe real human sacrifice is happening on a deeper level.
Well, I just bring it back to this point, and that is Bonacci not even knowing who Hunter Thompson was. Just stated, well, Hunter Thompson was there producing the snuff movies. Snuff as in somebody dies. And the graphic depiction by Bonacci was so graphic, in fact, that there was a riveting moment, Doc, when Alex Jones had John DeCamp on a couple of years ago, and DeCamp's reading from the book, and Jones says, whoa, wait a minute, that's Northern California, that's Bohemian Grove. And DeCamp goes, oh, I don't know what that is. Huh. So in that moment on the radio, they realized that where Bonacci had been was where Jones had been doing his work, and that is Bohemian Grove, which is a very strange occult place where the global elites go to act like very bad boys and girls. Mm-hmm. So that's another whole situation. But once again, I want to remind everybody you're listening to the Grassy Knoll on Dade City Micro Radio, AM 1610 WDCX. We have with us Dr. Ellen Lacter from the University of California at San Diego with us. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. The website, which is longer than anybody's anything, is truthbeknown2000.tripod.com. Just go there, or else just do a search, and you'll get there. Do you want to talk about the website a little bit, about the resources that are there?
Yeah, I started this website, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, and there's a lot of information here about Satanism and witchcraft, and there's some on the espionage projects, not all that much. I'm a little bit more careful with that stuff. There's stuff here that's helpful to people who are wondering if their abuse, if they may have more abuse than they thought. You know, they're starting to get some memories. They're going, oh my God, am I a victim of this too? There's indicator lists where they can read some symptoms that are often found in ritual abuse survivors and see how much they might fit with some of that. There's indicators for of ritual abuse in children. There's indicators of mind control. There's a very long article on working with abused children for therapists who are working with ritually abused children. And then there's some articles exposing some of the things that have happened in San Diego related to ritual abuse and the media's suppression of the evidence and a lot of different things.
One of the things I thought was key, you have an article up there for therapists, Lessons I Have Learned. Mm-hmm. I thought that was pretty interesting and informative also. There's another one there, and I'm looking through all these stacks of pages here. Let's see.
There's a mind control simple to complex.
That's it. I'm looking right at it. Yeah, I printed out 6 pages. That's really interesting, the Stockholm Syndrome, my goodness.
Mm-hmm. And that's pretty standard, the Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, you know, that would happen in a lot of cults that are publicly known, where the person really submits to their abusers and buys into the agenda of the abusers to survive. It happens sort of as an automatic reaction to being imprisoned and terrified. Mm-hmm. But the types of mind control that ritually abused people experience work at even a more binding, deeper level, where the person doesn't even remember what happened to them, and they also may not even know what they're doing. So they may be waking up at 3 in the morning and going to places and not knowing it, or coming back and going to sleep, and the next morning they don't even know they were out. That happens a lot. Or they may wake up at 4 in the morning and find that they're holding a telephone, and they're going, why am I holding the phone? I'm supposed to be sleeping, and just hang it up. And what they don't know is that 5 minutes before, another personality woke up, programmed to wake up at 3:55, called an 800 number, got reported in, got whatever new information they were supposed to get, and then that personality went away, and the person was supposed to go back to sleep, and it kind of didn't work properly because they found the phone in their hand, but they don't remember that they made the phone call. In fact, that was how I discovered the ritual abuse with one client. We had only gotten to memories of the familial sexual abuse with no ritual parts, but yet the person was starting to tell me about all these strange phone situations where the phone she would get all these hang-up calls on particular days that are associated with ritual abuse, and I started asking more questions. I said, I'm concerned about these calls. Instead of saying, well, hey, I don't know, I have no idea what that means, I said, I am concerned with the pattern of those calls, the fact that they're happening so much at these particular times, and, all these calls where nobody's there. And that investigation, that willingness to be concerned about that and to express that began to open up that whole other part of what had been happening to her.
One of the things I fear, and I talk about this in these terms with those I'm associated with, mm-hmm. But I will ask you this, if you can speak to it, should we assume that so many of our, what I call milk carton kids,
yes,
have been absconded for the purpose of ritual abuse. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when Johnny Gosch was taken, which was, I don't remember if that was 87 or do you know that case?
Well, yeah, and that's real interesting how it ties into Thompson and Gannon. But go ahead, sure.
Yeah. I mean, and the Johnny Gosch case, in my opinion, is deeply connected to the Franklin cover-up.
Okay.
But when he was grabbed, trying to look up here when that was, he, I believe at that time, these groups were still grabbing kids off the street. That was 82.
Yeah,
okay, so that's 23 years ago. I don't think that these groups are doing anything that risky of exposure anymore. I think that a lot of the children who are sacrificed in rituals are brought in from third world countries. I think that or let's say you have a homeless person,
a runaway,
maybe not a child, because the child, if you have a homeless family, the parents are going to report that their child is missing, and they could risk exposure for that. But for instance, a homeless adult, an individual just walking in the streets alone, nobody's going to know that that person is gone. The shelter where he's been sleeping may know he didn't come back that night, but they would have no reason to suspect that he was dead. Those people may be grabbed. The other source for sacrifice is very often babies that are in utero for a person who's already a victim, and they'll force the delivery early, so 7 or 8 months gestation, and then that baby will be sacrificed, and then that person will be programmed to believe that she just had a miscarriage, and nobody will. So if people ask, well, my God, I thought you were going to have a baby, if she was even a person who had a public life. I think some of these people may not have a public life at all. They may just, nobody may know that they were pregnant. They may not have a job. They may just be kept somewhere, so that nobody would know that they were pregnant. But I think most of the babies that are sacrificed are deliveries before full term, and they're programmed to tell people that it was a miscarriage.
We've had a couple of high-profile cases lately of abductees and such. One, of course, in Florida, not very far from where I am right now. Do you feel that there is the old story, better reporting of abductions and the like, or do you think that there is a rise in abductions?
Well, I don't know that. I haven't been tracking that.
Okay.
And I definitely believe that some of the children who are abducted, a lot of them are horribly abused, and some of them are, on kind of a, within a very small group, or, an individual or a couple, they're tortured and ritually abused, but not in a very organized way, not a group that is much more careful not to be caught. One complaint that I do have about the whole law enforcement network is that there is not a effective centralized data source for the faces of the children used in the pornography that's seized, because I think that a lot of the ritual abuse would be caught if that was done better. So if there was actually even an international data bank of the faces of children used in the child pornography, then when a child discloses that they were used in pornography, or even an adult says, hey, 15 years ago I was used in pornography, that somebody could look into that data bank and see, oh my gosh, this kid was used, and therefore we have to listen to their whole story about the fact that all these neighbors were abusing them, and that this was a ritual, a big cult or whatever. Because right now, when a child makes a disclosure related to ritual abuse, people tend to just not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. They're afraid of being sued. Law enforcement district attorneys, everybody is afraid of negative press and lawsuits if they get involved with these cases. But so the kid is sort of discredited, and there's sort of pressure on the therapist to, to stay silent and to not even make the child abuse reports. I'd say there's pressure on the therapist to not even report it. But if we had a centralized data bank of the faces of children in the seized pornography, then, I have a bunch of kids I would like to be able to send to a place like that and go find this kid, because I think there's a good chance that that child's face is there, and then all of the child's reports become something that people are going to have to listen to more.
Of all the specializations you could have gone into, you chose this one, or perhaps it chose you?
Yeah, it chose me. I think for most of us, just like it chose so many support people for survivors, even spouses or friends. When you hear somebody talk about this, like you were talking about when you listened to Kathleen Sullivan and how, it's caught you too.
Yes.
You've got the bug. When you really feel the pain of somebody who's been through this, and then the second set of pain that they have because the whole system is telling them that they're crazy and telling them to shut up, and nobody, all of the things that are in place in our society that are supposedly there to help, all give them the message of go away, I don't want to hear this, then, the sense of injustice. So if you have a heart at all, I just can't see you turning your back on it. In fact, people say, oh my God, how do you do this? That's so wonderful of you. And my response is, how can anybody not, if they really feel it, if they really get it, if they know it's true, if they've really met somebody and they can feel that, to turn away and not do anything is just horrible.
Reminds you of that line from Ohio by Neil Young, how can you run when you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why a lot of us are undergoing this Orwellian ignorance of strength, because they would choose to hide their head in the sand and not know, because life is a whole lot more pleasant that way. But life just isn't that pleasant.
That's right.
Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with a little bit of paranoia?
In the beginning, I looked a little nuts myself when I first realized how large a problem this was, and that the mind control was being done, and that our own government was participating in torture to install mind control, and that there was an Aryan agenda group using mind control, and then there was another group trying to stop the Aryan group using mind control. And when I really realized how big this was and how effective the programming was and all of that, I became not clinically paranoid, but really acting a little strange. When I first came back from discovering all of that, I brought my husband into the center of the living room to whisper to him about the things I had learned, because I was afraid to stand near a window.
I know. Hey, listen, we're running out of time, and I appreciate you being here, but we all have to confess once in a while waking up and being a little bit in trepidation, but hey, that makes you human. Right. Dr. Lacter, thank you so much for being with us. I hope we will be together soon, and I'm going to track down some other people along these lines, and hopefully we can get a little light shown on this. Thank you so much for being with us.
Okay, thank you very much.
God bless and good night.
Okay, good night.
Welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. It is February 19th, 2007, and you're going to get a pre-record that was done just yesterday with Dave McGowan. We're going to be talking about his book, Program to Kill, and the history of serial killers, or at least the most recent few decades of such, where it might have been not necessarily a sporadic or organic thing, if you will. I guess I got hacked during the weekend, and I don't know. It was more like somebody was in there being a poltergeist and moving furniture around, if you know what I mean. Shows disappeared. In fact, one is still gone. It is the Chapman show, but it's on the server. See, whatever they did just to the website. The audio's on the server, and if you want to hit the Chapman show,
And you can see from all the other links on the audio page, they go by obviously a certain pattern. You can pretty much guess sometimes if you don't see what's there, that in fact you can hit it. So with this one, of course, it would be visigot.com/audio/Chapman2-9-07.mp3, right? Chapman's name, Chapman2-9-07.mp3, and you'll be able to get Chappie. All right, so anyway, I don't know what that was about. It could have been a lot worse. We'll see if it happens a second time. I don't know if this is a warning or something like that, because of what we've been doing. Or it could be just a coincidence, honestly. It could be that. So we'll see what transpires, and that, I think, will tell all. In the meantime, I still can't breathe, so bear with me. We got Dave McGowan for you, and we'll have him back again tomorrow.
We are taping this on Sunday, February 18th for Play Today, Monday, the 19th. We have with us Dave McGowan. The website, by the way, if you want to check it out while you're listening, is www.davesweb.cnchost.com. You can hit that also from my website, either the upcoming shows or his audio, which will be archived right after you hear this. He's the author of 3 books, Program to Kill, get it out there, bro, Learning the F Word, and Derailing Democracy. And it's about Program to Kill that we're going to speak to today. And so, Dave, thanks very much for joining us out there on the left coast, huh?
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Well, it's been a long time, and, serious as a heart attack. Folks have said to me time and time again, why don't you? Why don't you? How come you haven't had you on? And you know what? They're right. And so anyway, that time is past us, and you're here, and I'm glad that you are. Again, you've agreed to be on tomorrow also to talk about another subject. But with Program to Kill, and it deals with the nature of, I guess, serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, down in Florida, as you well know, they've had their share. One was just put to death recently. But from your take, are you seeing this as something also that, I hate to say it, I mean, it may not be the best term for it, but is this also kind of weaponry that is somewhat unleashed against the population? What's going on there?
I see it very much as being that, yeah. I see it as being basically, I guess you could say, a psychological warfare tactic, very much along the lines that terrorism is used, in that it's a vehicle of sorts for instilling fear in people, and as it's become more and more apparent, particularly over the last several years, it's all about control through fear. I mean, that's the basic operating principle of our government and most other governments as well. You strike enough fear into people, and they're going to run to Big Brother for protection. We see that with terrorism now. Alleged terrorism anyway, and before that, and still, the serial killers play very much the same role. I mean, very few things strike fear into people's hearts the way that serial killers do. So yeah, I think it's very much sort of a created phenomenon that is used as a vehicle for social control.
Was there an event, was there a particular individual who obviously had a reign of terror that finally made you want to take a look into this? Because this is not a very pleasant subject, no doubt about it. I mean, it's as abysmal as a Nietzschean event. But was there something that happened out there that made you finally say, you know what, I want to take a look at this?
Yeah, there was actually. It kind of arose, and we talked a little bit about this, off the air. It kind of grew out of something that I discovered while researching my second book, which you mentioned in your intro, the Understanding the F Word book, which was that George Bush, and very few people realize this. What they do realize is that he was like the governor, he basically green-lighted more executions during his tenure as governor of Texas than any governor in any state in the history of the Union. I mean, he is America's premier hanging governor, so to speak. And people do know that, but what they don't know is that he actually did issue one and only one pardon out of the, I think, 153 cases that crossed his desk as governor, and that was for a gentleman by the name of Henry Lee Lucas, a guy who at various times confessed to up to like 600 of the most brutal, horrendous serial killings imaginable, complete with cannibalism, necrophilia, torture, mutilation, all the standard that you find in these cases. And yet out of all the people who came before George Bush to have their cases reviewed, he was the only one granted a pardon. And that definitely piqued my interest. And I included that in the book, and I got a lot of feedback on that from people who said, well, why would he do that? Well, what, do you have a theory about why he would have done that? And at the time, I really didn't. So I decided to look into it, and what I discovered in researching his case was that he had once written a book, or assisted it. He was largely illiterate, but he had basically told his story to another gentleman who had put it out as a book, a very obscure book entitled The Hand of Death. And what Henry claimed is that what looked like a series of random killings were actually basically contract killings, that he was killing on behalf of a cult, and that his victims were in fact targeted for specific purposes, and that his job basically was to make them look like random, senseless killings when in fact many of them had specific motives. And around that same time, I happened to, I think it was referred to me by someone or something that knew, that I was delving into this research, a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, which is an alternative study of the Son of Sam case, David Berkowitz, in which he presents a very similar scenario, which is that David Berkowitz was actually just one of many sons of Sam, and that he was acting on behalf of a cult of individuals, and that basically he became the fall guy to cover up the involvement of all these various other individuals. And that led me to a book, The Family, by Ed Sanders, about the Manson case, which had other parallels. And then I stumbled upon a couple cases in Europe that had been reopened, the Monster of Florence case, and another one that I can't think of right now, which had recently been reopened at the time that I was doing this research, because evidence had surfaced that those killings were not the work of a single individual, but were in fact the work of a cult of individuals. So, I started to realize that there was a few too many of these cases floating about for them to be just sort of isolated cases. So I avidly dove into the serial killer literature, so to speak, and started going through, the various books about first, all of your standard high-profile guys that everybody knows, the Ted Bundys, the John Wayne Gacy's, Jeffrey Dahmers, Hillside Stranglers, and those led me to various other cases, and ended up researching, some 36 or so, or maybe more, individual quote-unquote serial killer cases, and I found these same sort of common threads running through each of the stories. And what I began to realize is that there was a completely different way of looking at this whole serial killer phenomenon than the way that we are conditioned to look at these people. It's kind of a long answer.
I like that. That's just fun.
But that's basically how the book came about. A lot of people were kind of surprised by it, because prior to that, my writings were, I don't want to say more mainstream, but they were not really as far off the beaten path as this book took me, which, the threads running through that are ones of mind control and, satanic cult and occult groups and all this kind of weird stuff that's normally thought of as being kind of the province of right-wing conspiracy theorists, where I have always thought of myself as being solidly on the left. And so it caught a lot of my readers by surprise that I had what they thought was, taking this kind of a change of direction. But, basically, I just follow the trail wherever it leads. I'm not really afraid to venture, in any direction. A lot of what I find I consider to be disinformation and nonsense. But, the more I looked into this, the more I realized that there was, some pretty solid documentation of a lot of this stuff. And the book, by the way, is drawn from almost exclusively from mainstream sources. This is not a book that's sourced to, posting on conspiracy.com or something like that. This is all information culled from very mainstream books, magazine articles, newspaper articles. It's my belief that you can get a pretty accurate picture of how the world operates from these sources, but it's all about knowing how to read between the lines and sort of mine out the little nuggets of information and connecting the dots. It's really all about pattern recognition and recognizing how these sort of hidden themes run through each of these individual stories.
What was your approach like in the book? Did you go ahead and profile certain individuals? Did you approach it that way, or is it a running narrative that starts chronologically and ends up decades later? The organization of the book probably isn't the best. It's kind of rambles off in various directions. There's like so much information and so many different threads that I tried to follow. Probably could have used the services of an editor. Unfortunately, I didn't have one available. So I don't know that the book's really organized in any particular way. Right. It's just there's a lot of information packed in there, and I don't know. As far as how it's organized, it's kind of I don't know. It makes sense to me. I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense to some other people, but anyway. Oh, well, no. Obviously, I haven't availed myself of the book, but again, this is a topic, and it's kind of sounds nasty to use the word interesting, but it is interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. Actually, the first section of the book, like the first, 6 chapters, I think, which are organized into the first section, are actually about organized pedophilia and child pornography and various things of that nature, and that sort of segues into the serial killer stuff because there are very, very clear parallels between the two topics. They maybe don't at first seem to be related, and some people are kind of surprised. They're like, wow, I'm 80 pages into this book and there's nothing about serial killers yet. Well, but it all kind of ties in if you just sort of stick with it through the end. It becomes pretty clear that it's all sort of tied in. The book goes into even the parallels between, for example, the John Benet Ramsey kidnapping and the so-called crime of the century kidnapping, alleged kidnapping. I don't believe he ever was kidnapped, but anyway, of the Lindbergh baby. And it covers a lot of ground, and to somebody who hasn't read it yet, it may seem like it's kind of a lot of unrelated stuff, but it actually is all very closely related as you see, as the book proceeds. It kind of all comes together.
Well, let me ask you, because do we have two things at play here? Do we have actual rogues or maniacs that operate on their own? And do we have a situation where we have, and I would say, a serial killer or a personification for serial killers? As you said, like with the Son of Sam, he's the one that hangs, but were there other operatives going on? So again, Do we have some people who are definitely, just pathological, like Dahmer? I don't know, or Theo Bundy, who, wreaked havoc down here in Florida. Do we have some people running on their own, and do we have an orchestrated, shall we say, for lack of better words, maybe, network?
Yeah, there is, I believe, a network to some extent, and there's a lot of connections between a lot of these cases that you wouldn't expect to find. In one of the chapters of the book, I actually kind of draw a distinction between what I believe are sort of, I guess you could say, programmed patsies and guys that are very, very likely programmed assassins. Albert DeSalvo being a classic example of the first. His case has recently been reopened, and modern DNA testing and stuff has basically proven that he was not, in fact, responsible for at least some of the murders that he was credited with, and in fact, he probably had nothing to do with any of them. He was never convicted, never even tried for any of the murders, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that, but he was actually never charged, tried, or convicted for any of those murders. And it's now becoming clear that he was in fact railroaded as a patsy, and some of the people behind that railroading had very clear CIA connections. There were indications of hypnosis and various things like that. It's quite an interesting story. And the classic example of the latter would be a guy like Arthur Shawcross, who was, or claimed to have been, a Phoenix program type assassin in Vietnam. He claimed to have racked up 43 kills in Vietnam, which were, just these barbaric crimes that he committed that, involved rape and mutilation and leaving bodies on display and all the stuff that serial killers traditionally do, and that's very typical of the Phoenix program. In fact, my book postulates that in many ways the serial killer phenomenon, which really bubbled to the surface in the latter years of the Vietnam War, was kind of a case of the Phoenix program coming home, because the Phoenix program was a torture, terror, and assassination in Vietnam that was specifically designed to strike fear and demoralize the Vietnamese people. It was an assassination program that claimed at least 20,000 lives. I mean, our own Congress has admitted that at least 20,000 lives were taken by it, and other estimates range considerably higher than that. But these were crimes that were deliberately committed just as barbarically as possible to strike fear into the hearts of the Vietnamese people by leaving bodies on stakes and just doing all this just all these horrendous things that were done to as a psychological warfare tactic. And it's the very same things that you find with serial killers here at home, the very same behaviors, the very same sorts of scenarios. But anyway, Shawcross claimed 43 kills in that manner in Vietnam, none of which made him a murderer, of course. It just made him an American soldier. But then he continued on that pattern when he came home and racked up several more kills. So he is the guy that is mentioned in the book as just one example, a very clear-cut example of what I feel is a programmed assassin versus a programmed patsy. So I think there's both sort of factors at work there in these cases. Well,
I'm glad you mentioned the situation about DeSalvo as the Boston Strangler. In a case like Manson, and maybe we can talk about that in a little bit, that looks like it was very much handled. But in a situation like DeSalvo, would there have been any kind of consortium or group that I wouldn't say benefited from it, but was there some kind of objective they were trying to achieve, or was this just some kind of also experiment to dry run a way of creating terror and see how it all works out? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I'm not really sure, to be honest. That one was I only know of that from what I've read in books and whatnot. It was a little before my time.
Stop it.
So I don't know, what the whole kind of social climate and whatnot was like back then. The Manson case was more, I was actually aware of it at the time, and it's kind of easy for me to look back now and say that was, in part, one of the objectives being pursued there was the discrediting of the whole hippie and hippie commune type movement. It was basically a way of saying, well, look at this. These aren't these peaceful hippie communes that we've been led to believe. These people are mass murderers, And I think at the same time, what was playing out was what was that group called? The Symbionese Liberation Army, with the whole, kidnapping of Patty Hearst and all that. And that group was quite obviously an intelligence front. I mean, all of the people, the main principal people involved in that were like former police informers and former FBI affiliates and all this. And the guy that really was behind starting it all was a guy named Colston Westbrook, I believe his name was. He worked out of Vacaville, which was the site of all sorts of mind control operations. You find all kinds of references to that in the mind control literature. And he was a former Phoenix program operative too, actually, not coincidentally. And so there's numerous indications that was definitely an intelligence operation, and I think it was kind of a two-pronged strategy there with the Manson family sort of discrediting the hippie communes and the Symbionese Liberation Army sort of discrediting the more radical groups like the SDS and the Weather Underground and whatnot that were in operation at that time. And that was just one of the goals. I mean, there were others, but I believe that those were goals that were being pursued specifically there, but I don't know in the case of the Boston Strangler because it was just a little before my time.
Thank you for reminding me because it wasn't before my time. Thank you very much. But I take a look at three individuals, and one of them would be Gacy, the other would be Dahmer, and of course we talked about DeSalvo. Usually it's always females that seem to be the ones who are obviously victimized. With Dahmer and Gacy, that was not the case, though, wasn't it? And did you treat them at all in your book?
Yeah, they're both in there. And they both actually had fairly high-level government connections. Jeffrey Dahmer, there was a strange little story about him, about how he went to Washington, D.C. on a high school field trip when he was like 17, 18 years old. He's like a junior, senior in high school, something like that. Went with his class on a trip, and he ducked into a phone booth at one time and made a call, told his friends that he was going to arrange a private tour of the vice president's office for them. And, they were naturally skeptical, thought he was full of shit, but he made the call, and sure enough, he got him in not only just to a private visit to the vice president's office, but also to a private visit to the office of a very high-level columnist, Washington columnist of that time, whose name I can't remember. And, these are the kinds of things, these little tidbits of information that you will find in these people's stories that are never explored. They're just kind of tossed out there as sort of sides and never followed up on, and no one gives any significance to them. But, it's quite obvious that your normal average Midwestern kid going back to Washington, D.C. on a visit cannot make a quick phone call and secure a private tour of the vice president's office. It's just, that doesn't happen in the real world. This guy obviously has some kind of high-level family connections, And there were other indications as well. And Gacy would definitely had high-level connections. He was actually once photographed sitting side by side with Rosalind Carter at the time that she was First Lady. And he can be seen wearing a lapel pin that signifies that he has a very high-level Secret Service clearance. And, parts of his police file were blacked out with the notation that it was FBI matter. And, there was all kinds of these little, he claimed friendships with the governor of Illinois and the Attorney General. And, this guy was connected politically, quite well connected politically. And that's a fact that's usually just completely brushed over in the biographies of him. And it's very common, Ted Bundy, same thing. You look at a lot of these people and you will find that there were, in fact, unexplained connections that these people had to people in high levels of, power?
I'm going to ask you something which is kind of outside what we're doing, but based on that, it'll give me an idea of what other kind of questions I'd like to ask.
Okay.
Let's take a look about Clinton.
Okay.
Are you familiar with either the reality or the unreality of the Clinton body count?
I am aware. Yeah, I'm aware to some extent. I mean, I first heard about it years and years and years ago, before I was as deeply enmeshed in the, conspiracy, quote unquote conspiracy literature as I am now, and considering the source that it initially came from, which was like on a tape put out by, Jerry Falwell or one of these guys, I thought it was, complete nonsense when I first read it. But, no, I'm much less skeptical of those claims now. And I know there is quite a body count. Vince Foster being the most, high profile of them. And I believe that he absolutely was whacked. There's no question in my mind that his suicide was not, in fact, a suicide. But I'm not completely up to speed on all the details of the list. And now,
no, the reason I bring it up is that in those Clinton Chronicles, the documentary that was released, I think it was also updated and released again. And you've got investigators for the Arkansas Bureau of Investigation. And they just kind of look like kind of nonplussed in the camera when they talk about all the stuff they had on him. And you also had some of the victims' relatives speaking. And they couldn't. I guess they've gotten to a point where they kind of understand why it never went to trial and nothing ever happened, but they are still to this day, I think, just bewildered that that could have been that prominent, that widespread, and yet he never hung and no one else ever did for that. But here's where I'm going with this also. Are we looking at with serial killers, and those especially who might be victims, or not victims, but obviously I guess you would say proponents of MK Ultra and other mind control programs? Are we looking at something where there is a systemic and a very detailed way of eliminating individuals out there and making it look like somebody's just bull goose loony?
Yeah, that's certainly one. That's certainly one motivating factor. Yeah, the whole kind of mythos of serial killers arose at least in part to write off a lot of politically motivated killings as just sort of random acts of violence. That's certainly the BTK killer case. That was absolutely at play there. The first victims, his first alleged victims, were a military family, an intelligence guy who had, told his son that he was in fear for his life, and they felt he'd been targeted, and he'd given his son instructions on what to do should anything happen to him and all. I mean, this is a guy who knew that his life was on the line, and he was deeply involved with intelligence operations and whatnot, and sure enough, the whole family got wiped out. And then, they sort of tacked on these other random killings of women that had absolutely nothing to do with the initial taking out of this family. I mean, the entire family pretty much, with the exception of one son, I think, was taken out. And, the surviving son has said that he just doesn't buy the single assailant scenario. It just absolutely would have been impossible. His father was a trained commando. He knew martial arts. He had weapons in the house. His wife was a judo instructor. The two kids knew judo. They had a guard dog on the premises that everyone agreed was vicious and fiercely loyal, would not have allowed anyone in that house that, he didn't think belonged there. And, the kid had said, there's just no way that one guy walked into my house and took out my whole family. There's just no way that could have happened. My dad, was on the lookout to begin with. He was already looking over his shoulder. He was a tough guy. The rest of the family was trained. They were armed. There's no way. So, there's no question that family was basically taken out in some sort of paramilitary operation, and then they later just tacked on the deaths of all these women with completely different MO, had absolutely nothing to do with it, and said, oh, look, this is just a string of serial killings, that's all it is. So yeah, that's certainly one of the motivating factors behind the whole serial killer phenomenon, is that it allows politically motivated killings to be just sort of,
hidden,
swept under the rug, and nobody takes another look at them because, they're just random acts of violence.
Before we go any further, I want to tell you that we're Dave McGowan. The website is www.davesweb.cnchost.com. As we said, he is the author of Program to Kill, Derailing Democracy, and I apologize for butchering the other one, which is Understanding the F Word, which I said was Learning the F Word. And you know what that is? It's a horrible, horrible look into my brain, because I learned the F Word, but I never really understood it. So anyway, it's Understanding the F Word. I apologize for that. You were very gracious, but also you've got a whole lot going on that website. So why don't we just take a second and inform people as to what they can find there through a lot of the information that you have compiled.
Oh, God, a little bit of everything.
And you're not in front of your computer, are you?
What's that?
You're not in front of your computer, are you?
No. Like most people, or like most, researchers, a lot of my time has been occupied for the last, 5.5 years by 911.
Mm-hmm.
It is pretty much the seminal event of my adult life, pretty much. Everything flows from that. I mean, everything in our world today is justified on the basis of 911. The wars, the clampdowns on civil rights and privacy rights and due process rights, and on and on and on. Everything is based on the fact that it's a supposed reaction to legitimate responses to 911. But if 911 wasn't what they tell us it was, then all of that needs to be reevaluated, obviously. So it's a very important issue, and it's one that I'm not going to let go of. Some people have said it's been 5 years, we haven't gotten through to anyone yet, it's not going to happen. Which is probably true,
Well, maybe not. Okay.
Kennedy assassination is 45 years old now almost, and we still haven't gotten to the truth of that. So, but I, for one, aren't going to give up on it. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a wide range of issues that's explored on my website, in my newsletters. Just kind of whatever catches my interest on the news, I branch out in various directions and follow various trails and see where they'll lead. So you never know what you might find on my website. There's a lot of sordid weirdness on there.
Well, I mean,
all of it documented, though. I mean, I'm
documented weirdness.
I consider myself to be a pretty careful researcher. I don't just grab onto any source that I find because it happens to support an idea that I have. I try very hard to only present what I think that I can document fairly well. Well,
first and foremost, though, you do have the Center for an Informed American newsletter.
Uh-huh.
Now, is that something that you will disseminate from those who do request it from you?
Yeah, I have a subscription service for it, and they are also posted on my website for those who, some people are very leery of subscription lists, which I can't really blame them in this day and age. Everything you do is pretty much tracked and monitored, so they're available either by subscription or just by dropping by the site and checking up to see if I've posted a new one recently. They don't appear on any kind of weekly or regular basis. They used to, kind of, but they just pop up when I get around to it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, tomorrow we're going to talk a little bit about 9/11, in fact, specifically Flight 93, if that's okay with you.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Okay, because that to me is the crown jewel of that whole day, and that's a bad term to use, but anyway, we'll deal with that tomorrow.
going back to the premise about which we're speaking today, and that is serial killing and such, I don't know that you treated this, and I'm going to ask you about it, because this to me seems to be an example of, unfortunately, a number of people being executed to perhaps cover up one particular hit. Did you cover this, or if you did not, do you have any opinion on what in the world that bizarre situation with Malvo and Williams, the DC snipers, were all about?
I did not cover. The book was actually released
before, right? Mm-hmm.
Before that case. I did cover it on my website in a series of, I don't know, probably like 5 or 6 posts. I covered the shootings as they were going on, and then the first trial of John Muhammad. I think I did not. I had moved on to other things by the time the other guy, the kid, went to trial.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there were serious irregularities and questions. That case was just downright bizarre. You know, I mean, you had the police chief going on national television to deliver this bizarrely cryptic message, which sounded very much like a post-hypnotic suggestion, you know, and which was immediately followed by the 2 of them found sleeping in their car, you know, taken into custody without a fight, and there was just, there's a lot of weirdness, you know, where the gun came from, and just, I mean, I don't immediately recall all the details, but that's all freely available on my website for anybody that wants to look at that. And that's actually kind of a good introduction to the kind of material that you find in the book. So if you want sort of a free preview, go to my website and pull up that series of, I think, probably about six posts, I believe, maybe more, maybe less, I don't know. And you read through those, and if you find that of interest, you will probably very much like what the book has to offer, I would say.
We're talking, when you were saying about the 6th post, are we talking about the newsletter?
Yeah, the newsletter.
I'm going to hit it right now. All right, it's June 26, 2002. All right. Well, I'm not sure that's it, but that's okay. They know they can go there for it. Well, what I wanted to ask you about it was this. One of the things that was strange was that they came up with the identification of the vehicle that they thought was being used by the 2 of them, and it's something that's almost laughable, because everything in the beginning was a white step van or a white panel van. I'm going, why in the world would people who are trying to be furtive, a white step van, I mean, this is not the getaway vehicle of choice, or the white van, and of course that stopped traffic on I-95, I don't know how many times when they were looking for them. And then also, when Harry was with the show, we were talking about this as it was happening. When you find out what kind of car they had, when you find out that the back seat was missing, and it was kind of it was a little bit of a dilapidated car.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about this because coming from Jersey, the little nasty secret and the joke in Jersey is you don't have to travel more than like 5 miles on the turnpike or any of the U.S. highways without seeing 2 black guys being jacked out of a car, you know what I mean, and the cops going through it. And I'm saying to myself, here these 2 guys are going around in, like I said, a rather disheveled vehicle with no back seat. How in the world, through all that time and all that driving, didn't they ever get pulled over? Which to me is kind of curious, if you know what I'm saying. And as you just mentioned also, that little, what seemed to be an Manchurian Candidate trigger verse in the Cherokee poem or whatever, fairy tale. I mean, and then all of a sudden they get found sleeping,
Something about the duck is caught in the noose or something.
Yeah.
Bizarre. He just reads off this bizarre thing with some kind of strange explanation for it, and then, like, almost immediately they're taking it. I mean, it was just really, really bizarre. I mean, it was almost like I got the impression that they, whoever was in the controllers or whoever was in charge of this operation had felt that they had lost control of their charges and needed to rein them in or something. So they had this guy go on and read this. I mean, what sounded an awful lot to me like a post-hypnotic suggestion, and to a lot of other people. Well, even people that aren't into the conspiracy, thought that was just really bizarre. That was my impression that they were trying to communicate with these guys through the media, because I believe they had sort of maybe lost control of them or something and needed to rein them in, which is exactly what happened immediately following that bizarre press conference.
Well, yeah, and I mean, no sooner was that. I mean, we saw that happen on the Today Show, and it was in the early morning hours, and I guess within that day or whatever, they're caught sleeping in, I guess, some kind of like roadside rest area.
In a rest stop, yeah. They were pulled over supposedly at a roadside rest stop, and there was some weird thing about the guy that the whole thing was just really weird. I don't remember all the details, but I mean, it was just bizarre. But it's all in the newsletters. I pulled up my website. The first one I think I actually wrote was in October of 2002 was number 20. That was about the killings, I think.
Right, I see, right.
Then the trial comes up beginning on number 45 through, like number 48 or something like that.
Yeah.
And, I covered all of that weirdness, but it's been quite a few years now, so I don't remember all the details, but there was certainly no shortage of weirdness in that story, yeah. I mean, the whole thing just absolutely reeked. And I believe that one of the victims, if I remember correctly, was involved in some kind of a counterintelligence analyst or something like that. That at the time there was some kind of controversy brewing over. I don't know if that's when all the dust up over the falsified, Iraqi intelligence was in the news. Mm-hmm. But there was something going on, and one of the victims I remember was like a
female.
What's that?
Was she a female?
Yeah, it was a woman. She was some kind of counterintelligence analyst of some sort. Just happened to be one of the victims. Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of the same strands running through that story as through the ones in my book. So it didn't make the book, but it did make the website. So I guess that's better in a way, because anybody can pull them up anytime they want, and check it out, and see if it's something that you might be interested in pursuing further.
In the research that you did, I don't know how far back you went. But whatever that is, was there a time, and I mean I'm talking about the 19th into the 20th century or whatever, was there a time when it seems that there is now all of a sudden a certain frequency of the serial killer? I mean, were people, dealing with this in the 19th century? I mean, we know about Jack Ripper, okay, and that obviously he was plugged in across the Atlantic, but with what you researched, is there something that indicates that the serial killer, let's just say phenomenon, starts to really become quite obvious? Are we looking at it in the 19th century, the 20th century, the latter half of the 20th century, especially post-World War II? What about that?
The modern serial killer phenomenon, so to speak, and this is covered in the book. You know a lot about the book, actually. More than most people. I guess I should just...
Sometimes the magic works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. It actually began in the late 60s, early 70s in the San Francisco area. Mm-hmm. There was just sort of this explosion. We didn't even have in our vocabulary the term serial killer until it was coined by the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit in the early 70s to, explain this sort of explosion of these people. Before that, they were, very few and far between. You had your Albert DeSalvo, you had your Jack the Ripper, but they occurred, Ed Gein in Wisconsin or something like that back in like the 50s or something. But they were few and far between. They weren't like a part of our daily diet, so to speak, until like the late 60s and early 70s, and it really sort of burst forth from San Francisco, which was probably not coincidentally, that in those days, sort of an MK Ultra city, sort of like the whole Haight-Ashbury district, I think, was like an open-air MK Ultra operation.
Well, hold it right there. That's interesting you should say that. I agree with you, and I'm going to bring something up a little bit later with regard to what's going on out there, especially in and around Berkeley and such. Did you find that was a hotbed for a lot of, shall we say, cultural experimentation by the powers that be upon, a segment of the population, which in that time would have been the flower children?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's where, some of the original, what was this guy named? Something White, George White or something, operated this sort of safe house where they were, experimenting using prostitutes to drug people and whatnot. And, there was all kinds of MK Ultra type stuff going on in that scene, and that is exactly where this sort of serial killer phenomenon worked. What I found, kind of burst forth, and what I found in my research is, and this is all in the book, is that in this very short span of time, just like a few years, there were something like 6 high-profile serial killers stalking that area in just a period of a few years. You had Charles Manson, who started out up there and then drifted down to L.A. You had the Zodiac Killer. You had this big guy. What the hell was his name? Big giant guy. I can't even remember. But there was like altogether there was like 6 of them. It was just pretty incredible, really. And this was at a time when the serial killer phenomenon was so rare that we didn't even have a name for it yet. And yet out of this tiny little, geographic area, just a speck on the map, you had literally 6 of these guys operating pretty much simultaneously, which is, it's very, statistically I would think is very highly unlikely. So yeah, I believe that the modern phenomenon really kind of grew directly out of that city and the surrounding area, which was, as you say, just an absolute hotbed of social engineering, so to speak.
Yeah, let me run this by you. One of the things I've been thinking about lately, I guess probably prodded most, and that's a good verb to use when I say about Hunter S. Thompson's death. And then looking back at Ken Kesey, the Merry Pranksters, LSD, Stanford Research Institute, you know where I'm going with this? I'm starting to wonder, I'm beyond just starting to wonder, that this whole movement, this whole free love, drug stuff, was completely supported by whatever you want to call it, government military ops. The Stanford Research Institute has a certain, shall we say, infamy that they share with Tavistock. And I don't know about Kesey, but, Kesey obviously was a grad student at Stanford. You know what I'm saying? Now, I'm wondering if this whole thing wasn't just a wonderful, just, I guess, organic thing that happened in society, but whether or not these people wittingly or unwittingly were supported, and this whole cultural shift, and it really was great. And I mean, looking at me and my cohort at this point, this section of the baby boomers, really, we don't have a whole lot to brag about as far as more or less crushing morals and other taboos, supposedly, or breaking down the walls that allowed other taboos. So here's where I'm going with this. Have you ever thought about this or done any research into it with looking at that whole orchestrated flower power thing and believing that, yes, in fact, it was orchestrated?
I believe very firmly that it was. Yeah, I believe the whole thing was controlled, and that was kind of a hard thing for me to come to grips with.
Yep.
As I actually sort of came of age in the 70s, but I always sort of considered myself a decade, that I should have been born a decade sooner, because I've much more closely identified with the 60s, I mean, when I was in college, I was, my music selections were like the Doors and the Beatles, Jefferson Airplane and all that. I mean, I always felt myself sort of a child of the 60s that came along 10 years too late, and my idols were, Timothy Leary and Ken Kesey and Hoffman and Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, all these kind of guys, and I've come around to a much different line of thought in maybe the last 10 years or so, and it's very difficult for me to not believe that the whole thing was very much controlled, and I believe very strongly that Leary was absolutely an operative, and all of his cohorts, and a lot of people staunchly defend him, but I'm not one of those. And I think that it was very, very, very much a controlled movement, very much. I mean, I look at Woodstock as sort of an open-air MK Ultra project, where all this free LSD was, just like thousands of hits of LSD, mostly bad LSD, was just circulating openly. And when does that happen? When do people go around giving away thousands of doses of some drug? It's just... that whole scene in retrospect now, many years after the fact and with much research under my belt, I view much, much differently than I did in my younger days. Much differently.
Yeah, we have to be honest, I think, and to realize that we thought it was happening as a result of, like I said, some kind of organic process, or perhaps even a reaction to, which I think is a really trite excuse, realizing that we were living under the nuclear bomb, where one button push could be the end of all of us. This nihilism, so to speak, that leads to kind of like renegade behavior. But something was going on there. But
I think there's lessons to be learned for people today, in that, just as all the kids in the 60s, the hippies and the yippies and the flower children and whatnot, they all thought that they were rebelling against the system, working very much against the system, but to my mind, they were basically being controlled by the system. They were a dissident movement that was very quickly brought under control and kept under control, and I think that's very true today. I think the anarchist movement and the patriot movement, for example, are very much controlled, and same thing. And the people that are in those movements are quite sincere, and they're good people, and they think they're doing the right thing. But I think in many cases they are actually, whether they know it or not, they're working to advance the very agenda that they think they're fighting against.
Well, I'll tell you what, I can't believe you said that, but in a short time to come, I've been heading that way anyway. When you talk about even the Patriot movement being something, of course, we all get it about the Hegelian dialectic, but we never thought for a second that perhaps some of this, or perhaps most of it, is to create and pull us into a Hegelian dialectic that we don't even know. We're part of, in fact, what it would be is a conspiracy amongst the conspiracy researchers.
Yeah, well, a lot of researchers, they realize through, their own research and readings that, our intelligence agencies routinely control opposition groups in other countries. They control both sides of the debate, and if you want complete control, that's the only way to do it. You got to control all sides of the debate. You got to limit the parameters of the debate, basically. And they recognize that it's done in other countries. Well, why in the world wouldn't it be done here? It just stands to reason if that if they're going to all that trouble everywhere else in the world, why wouldn't they do it here? Of course they would. So it's I think a lot of people are seriously misled, and they may be quite sincere and quite passionate about what they're doing, but in many cases they are they're working against their own interests and don't realize it.
I tell you what, that if we can for another day, I'd like to talk to you about that without a doubt. But it's the old story that as I watch nationalism start to really sweep across this country, and I'm trying to say to people, don't you understand? This is exactly what happened in pre-World War II Germany, and the whole idea is, and if you'll forgive me, but if you remember that little segment from Spinal Tap, which when they're trying to explain about, this amp goes to 11. Do you remember that at all, David? Okay. All right. I don't want to sound too crazy, but it's just like, but it's America.
And you're like, don't you? No, I know it's America, folks, but don't you understand it can happen here? And it's like, oh, no, this is America. They don't get it.
That's one of the biggest impediments we face is that we are conditioned from birth to believe that this is America and nothing like that happens here. It happens elsewhere in the world, but, certainly not here in America. We're immune to that kind of stuff. But we're certainly not.
No.
By any stretch of the imagination are we immune to that kind of stuff.
And neither is the Patriot movement in any way, shape, or form insulated, protected against, invulnerable to the same kind of handling. But like I said, for another time, and I thank you for bringing that up. But one last thing before we have to go. With regard to what you've done in the book and all that you've seen from your research as you stand back, throughout the decades, and then, like you said, especially in the 60s, was there any kind of pattern that you found with frequency? In other words, did it rise at a certain time, a season, a year, any particular time during a decade? Did you find anything that showed you some kind of plot line through the last 40 years?
No. Well, I didn't really look at it in that regard. So, no. All I can say is I didn't find that, but I didn't really look for it. So I don't know if there is a pattern of that sort there. It didn't really cross my mind to look at it in that regard.
I'll tell you this: we have one still going on down here, and again, this is a little bit strange. Are you familiar with the case of Henry Bolin?
No, I'm not, but I do. My book does make note of the fact that the 3 states that contribute far more than their fair share of serial killers are Texas, Florida, and California, which are also just happen to be areas where cult activity is reported far more frequently than in other areas, and also happen to be the 3 primary entry points for most of the illegal drugs entering this country. And if you look through these stories, you'll definitely find that those are common strands that serial killers kind of tend to follow the drug traffic. The other covert operations run sort of hand in hand with serial killers, including drug trafficking and even human trafficking. They kind of follow the same corridors. So, your state and my state play very prominent roles in the book. You guys have you've had the Gainesville Ripper.
That's Danny.
Henry and his partner, and
Bundy
was there for all kinds of people, all kinds of them there, and in my state and in Texas, they just seem to just sprout up everywhere.
I'll only say this about Bolin. We moved down here, and I think he had just been, I guess, indicted for the murder. But we've been down here like for 14 years, and this thing is the longest running show judicially that I can think of. I've watched him age, and they still haven't been able to throw him into Old Sparky. And that's another interesting situation. But again, as you well know, Florida, because of the weather especially, there's a lot of transients, a lot of easy pickings for people because obviously they're removed from their home or whatever, from their home state. And it's strange, but I will tell you also in the county in which I live, this county leads the state in unsolved murders. Because what has happened throughout time is that they will kill somebody, whether it's a whack job or not, and they bring them out into good old rural Pasco County, and when the farmer goes out to cut his field or go through his orange grove, guess what he finds? So it's a really, really grisly situation around here. But before we go, again, Dave McGowan, you've written 3 books. We're talking today about Program to Kill. You do have Understanding the F Word and Derailing Democracy. How can people order them, and how can they also find out more about the work you've done?
For the most part, the books, your best bet is to get them from an online dealer. They're not the kind of books that you're going to walk into a brick-and-mortar bookstore and see prominently on display.
No.
Sure. Especially the second two. The first one a little more so than the second two, because I actually had a real publisher for the first one, whereas the second two I basically had to go the self-publishing route.
Right.
So, the only surefire way of finding them is, through Amazon or, one of the BarnesandNoble.com or one of the online sellers. You can pick up copies from any of those. First one's a little dated at this point. Still some good information in there, but the world has really changed a lot since I think that book was released in like '99 or something, pre-911. The world is kind of divided into pre and post 911 now. So, but it's still got some valuable information. But that's really your only sure bet for tracking the books down. And as far as getting additional information, there is you could spend many long days prowling through all the information on my website to get an idea of what I'm all about, and what my leanings are and my writing style and whatnot. I tend to inject a lot of humor, a lot of dark humor, black humor, on the principle that, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down and all that. Because I tend to delve into very, very dark topics, those stuff that a lot of people don't really want to even get involved in, and so I try to sort of lighten the load a little bit as much as possible with a little levity here and there. And, you can get a good taste of all of that from my website, and if you like what you find, then the books are out there. They may not be the easiest to find, but they are out there.
Okay. If you will, Dave, stay with us. I'm going to bid the audience goodbye. Folks, you will hear Dave tomorrow, and we'll talk about Flight 93. We'll see you back then, and have a good day.